you have to really approach this thing strategically. There's some critical mistakes that you can make along the way that can cost you dearly. And what we want to talk about today is, some of the pitfalls that we see, some of the mistakes that we see happen, and help you just get them on your radar screen, get you thinking about these things and what they can do. And, I would say that, you really kind of need to look at this thing in segments, right? So, typically what we see is from about age 65 to 70, that is more what we would call your early retirement active years. So that's the years that you're doing more traveling, you're spending more money, you are, enjoying the things that you dreamed about enjoying in retirement. And then, when 70 hits through about age 80, those are the RMD years where required minimum distributions start, where you have to start taking money out of those, pre-tax IRAs and 401k accounts and to start paying taxes on those. Healthcare costs typically rise in that period. And you really have to, plan for those things. And, required minimum distributions are something that they get a little complicated in how all that stuff works. And you need to have a basic understanding of that if you're going to be successful. And then, 80 plus, you're looking at some real issues there with, not only just, you know, eh, in the fact that you may at some point need some very expensive skilled nursing care that we know and we've seen can really impact someone's portfolio and really make a dent in it, if not deplete it. But you also have to do some legacy planning. You have to do some estate planning. You have to think about wills and trust and all of those wonderful things. And so we're going to kind of talk about that. But having the right tools in place is critical if you want to really be successful in this whole thing that we call retirement. What's different for women? And, this statistic caught me off guard, but I tell you, the fact that women still in 2026 still only make an average of 82 cents to every dollar that men make. That is just, that's a little crazy that that's still the fact today.
Yeah.
And, over a 40-year career, that gap compounds into a retirement savings shortfall of over $400,000 compared to their male counterparts. And that's a lot. That could be significant. And anybody will tell you 400,000 in retirement is a huge number, and it can really be the difference between meeting your income goals and not meeting your income goals. And so it's something you have to really think about.
It is. It is. And it even compounds into other things. I mean, so obviously you're earning, less money, and that presents later issues, right? That presents issues with Social Security. That presents issues with not having the ability to save and defer as much, because that 400,000 is a lot. But if you've been investing that over your career, that could compound to millions of dollars. So not having that available, not only in retirement, but to invest during your peak years. A lot of people we see in their 50s, they start really ramping up contributions, right? They start really, hey, I'm going to start putting 16, 20%, really trying to maximize those peak years. And for women, that might not be available, right? You might have the ability to do that. So it compounds into a lot of other aspects.
Compounds into a lot of things. Like Mitch said, if you have less earnings, you have a lower Social Security payout. Social Security is based on earnings. And, it's so the other thing that we see is, women typically being having the kind of caregiver nature that most women have, they are the ones that end up taking a break from the workforce for X amount of years to either care for children or to care for parents, but that typically falls on women. I'm not saying it always does, but it typically does. And, if you take that time out for caregiving, that further reduces, the opportunities for you to earn and to really make an impact financially. And, that's really not ideal for women. And 66% of family caregivers in the US are women. Honestly, I would have thought that number would have been a little higher.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, the average time out of the workforce for caregiving for women is 12 years. These are some crazy statistics
Yeah.
here. The average lifetime income loss due to caregiving is 324,000. So not only are you making 82 cents to every dollar of your male counterpart, but which is going to lead to potentially 400,000 less over a 40-year career. But in addition to that, you might take 12 years off and lose another 324,000 that you could have, earned. And then that in turn would reduce your Social Security, um, just for the caregiving piece would reduce it if you took 12 years out of the workforce, another $142,000.
Right.
So,
And the difference goes even further than that. Like that's just the direct loss. But if you consider 12 years out of the workforce, again, probably in peak years, I mean, that could slow down, that kind of gap can slow down career development. That can slow down the ability to get promotions and work through the ranks. You know what I mean? So it's the difference compounds way further than that. And that's why this is so important to talk about.
yeah, and I mean, you got to understand, like I think Mitch was talking earlier, is that all that money could be invested,
Right.
and you could be earning returns on that money that are compounding over, a long time. And what does that add up to? It can really be devastating to a woman. And and then if you find yourself having earned less, taking time out of the workforce to be a caregiver, and then all of these other things are impacted, and then all of a sudden you find yourself a widow. I mean, it is just obstacles that are extremely hard to navigate and overcome for women. So, that's why we're talking today. And that's why we want to talk through these things. So, 5 retirement challenges that are unique to women. So we've already talked about the longevity risk. They live longer and they need more income. So not only all the things we just said, but in addition to that, they live longer and need more money, right? Lower benefits. So again, if you pay less into Social Security and you have less earnings and all of that stuff, you're going to have a lower check when it comes to it. Widowhood risk, which again, we just mentioned. It's like you could just wake up and find yourself facing these things all by yourself at no fault to you. And life throws us some pretty big curveballs at times, and there's not a lot you can do about it. Another thing that we see is healthcare costs. Women spend significantly more in healthcare in retirement. And that is absolutely true. And I think it's because, just on a basic level, women will go to the doctor when they need to.
Yeah.
Women will address issues when they need to. Men aren't as good with that. They fight it. They don't want to go. They don't want to deal with stuff, and they let stuff linger longer, and they just don't get it addressed. So they don't end up spending as much money. And that's probably why they also don't live as long, right? So it's all part of the big picture. And, tax risk. So survivors, if you find yourself all of a sudden widowed and you have lost a spouse heading into retirement, then you also have to understand that now your tax bracket just got cut in half, but your income needs did not get cut in half. And the need to access pre tax accounts probably just went up, which puts you not only needing more pre tax money and having to pay, claim more income, but in with half the tax bracket you had, going in. And so that can be a problem.
It can. I mean, we see, a direct jump from what's usually the 12% bracket to the 22, 24. And that going from that in 1 year is a significant difference.
Significant, and can really change the tax picture dramatically for you. And, that's going to further deplete assets. And, it's just, this is why, planning and modeling through these things. And every time we do a retirement income plan with a couple, and I have to go and model the loss of a spouse in that process, it's I hate to do it.
Yeah.
I hate to even talk about it. But it's got to be addressed. And so, when we model through that and we really show them, like, okay, here's what would happen. So, first of all, the lower of the two social securities is going away. The survivor gets to keep the higher one, but the lower one goes away. The pension that he works so hard for is gone, right? Like, it more than likely, most people are taking straight life, and it just depends on your pension elections. But, the pension that you had, his pension is now probably off the table. And now, you just lost two guaranteed income streams that were really supporting your lifestyle. And now you're living on one social security, and you're having to access, any investments, and really put a strain on the stuff that you work so hard to save just to make ends meet, and paying more taxes and everything else. And so we model through that and with people, and we get a real clarity and understanding on, is this doable, right? Is this doable? And that's where things like life insurance come into place, because if it's not, then maybe a life insurance policy to make sure that there is survivor income